All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday morning, March the 18th, 2025. It is good to be together today. We're in the Torah portions. Just a reminder for everyone. I mentioned this on Shabbat, but sometimes if you may have missed the announcements during Shabbat, but without going kind of into all of it, I'm trying to kind of balance some things out. Got a lot of different things that we're trying to accomplish, and so we are going to be doing new Torah portion daily manas on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to be having replays of our Hebrews daily manas, and so those will be, so you can be on together live during that time. And like I was on yesterday, it's good for me to be, I go back through, because we're also doing now with the Hebrews teaching, we're doing the devotional companion with discussion questions that'll be available for those teachings as well. So I go back through to develop that. But just a refresher in all of going through Hebrews is so helpful. And really, going through Hebrews parallel to going through Exodus, and then as we get into the book of Numbers, or Leviticus, as we get into Leviticus, there's going to be a richness in that overlap, in that parallel. So I think that will be really beneficial for all of us. Just a reminder to everyone, if you would take a moment to just hit like, if you're watching on YouTube, you can just hit the like button, hit the little thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, we encourage you to subscribe, and then share, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and then as you're able to share our daily bites, to share our daily manna with different with your friends and neighbors. Are we having an Are we having an echo? Okay. I don't see an echo. Anyone mentioning an echo? All right. So we're going to be in Exodus today, and the title of today's real quick, just a reminder as well. If Antonio, you can fill the screen with the Torah portion for the week. It is vaYaqhel, and so you'll see we're going to be in Exodus 35 through 38, and that's okay. And then, of course, in some portions in 1 Kings and in our New Covenant passage, so you can see that there. All right. Well, the title of today's Daily Manna is The Tabernacle and Shabbat. Is this a blueprint for the Messianic age? The Tabernacle and Shabbat. We're going to be looking at Exodus 35. We're going to be looking really at Exodus 31 and Exodus 35. So the Torah portion this week, it reminds me of, how if you've read, when you read in the book of Acts, and you read Acts 10, which is the encounter where Peter with Cornelius and everything that happened there. And then Acts 11, Peter goes back to tell the believing community what happened, and so Acts 11 is restating Acts 10, and so it's like you get a lot of overlap. Well, this week's Torah portion, there's a lot that's there that we've covered or looked at in the previous Torah portions. So this week's Torah portion involves a really lengthy and detailed account of now the making of the Mishkan, the dwelling place of God, or the tabernacle, the Mikdash, the tabernacle, the sanctuary of the Lord in our midst. And so the Torah tells the story twice. First, in the giving, so up on the mountain, the Lord is giving the instructions to Moses. And then now we see the implementation of those instructions in this week's Torah portion. And so in the previous Torah portion, Kitisa, The last thing that we had looked at, there's a lot there. We weren't able to cover everything, but that's okay because it comes around year after year. In Kitisa, we had looked at the giving of the golden calf, or the making of the golden calf there at the end. But just before that, the Lord had been giving all of these instructions on the making of the tabernacle, on the making of the priestly garments, on those who would be overseeing. He was going to fill them with his spirit to oversee them in the making, that he would equip his people to do all that he asked them to do. And then, of course, immediately following that, just before the tragic golden calf episode, the Lord had given some instructions about the Shabbat. So after all of the commands, we saw in Exodus 31:11, it ended this way, saying, "They are to make them just as how I commanded you." And then, verse 12, we read this. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak now to the children of Israel, saying, surely you must keep my Shabbatot, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, so you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you. Therefore, you are to keep the Shabbat, because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it, who invalidates it, will die. For whoever does any work during Shabbat, that soul will be cut off from the midst of his people. Work is to be done for 6 days, but on the seventh day, a Shabbat of complete rest, holy to Adonai, is a Shabbat of complete rest, or a Shabbat Shabbaton, it says. A Shabbat of Shabbats, holy to Adonai. Whoever does any work on the Shabbat will surely be put to death." But the same language as before, it says, dying, he will die. So the children of Israel, the Bnei Israel, is to keep the Shabbat, to observe the Shabbat throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant, a Brit Olam, a covenant of the ages, or eternal covenant. It is a sign between me and Bnei Israel forever, for in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased from his work and was refreshed, or rested. He was nafash, he breathed. So what you have then in the previous portion, from Exodus 25 through the beginning of Exodus 31, you have all of these instructions about the giving of the tabernacle. All right. Followed by this instruction about Shabbat. And commentators have noted, really for centuries now, that during that portion from Exodus 25 to 31, that there are actually 7 times that it says, we see the phrase, "the Lord said to Moses." And I don't have these on screen for you, but I'm going to name them for you so you can go back and look at them at your own on your own timetable. But Exodus 25:1, Exodus 30:11, Exodus 30:17, Exodus 30:22, Exodus 30:34, Exodus 31:1, and those were the first 6. That those all involve, the Lord said to Moses, and those are all instructions about the building of the tabernacle. And then Exodus 31:12 is about Shabbat. So the first 6 point to the building of the Mishkan, the building of the dwelling place, all the furnishings again. And then the 7th command is the Shabbat command, right? So it seems plain that the purpose of this arrangement is to aid the reader in making the connection between the building of the tabernacle and the 7 days of creation, both of which you have 6 creative acts and then a 7th day of rest. And so you have this picture, right? Creation is in fact a picture of the Lord building a sanctuary. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. This is his dwelling place. And building a sanctuary, and then in the center of that sanctuary, you'll remember, is Eden, or in the midst of where he met with humanity, where he walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day, in the spirit of the wind of the day. And so you have that, and we noted a few weeks ago how the only places in Torah that you read about the cherubim are in the instructions of how the cherubim are to be put over on the ark of the covenant. This is the place where the Lord will meet with you. The only other place we see is in Genesis when Adam and Eve are sent out of the garden, and that guarding the entry to Eden, to the place where there is relationship and dwelling, are the cherubim. So the cherubim are a marked entry point into the presence of God, whether it's the Ark of the Covenant or in Eden. And so you have the creation account, where God will dwell with his people, and that concludes with the seventh day of rest. And so here in Exodus 31, the implementation, now the Lord gives all the instructions and then talks about Shabbat as a lasting sign between God and Israel, right? There is purpose here. There is intentionality here to what the Lord is doing. Verses 16 and 17 spell it out, that the Shabbat is a sign of the covenant God has made with Israel. It points towards something, right? The Lord's conduct, the way he's acted toward Israel in bringing us out of Egypt and bringing us to himself, establishing us as his people, right, culminates now in bringing us to himself. He's the construction of the tabernacle and then of course the institution of the worship that he's spelling out. It's all tied to creation, right? That in one sense here now, Israel is a new creation. Israel is this people of God whom he intends to use to undo what the first Adam did. Now, ultimately, Israel fails to do that, but we understand that Yeshua as the servant, and we've gone through this with in the book of Isaiah. He fulfills that. He is the ideal that Israel is supposed to be. He is the new, which Israel could not be, but this is what everything was pointing toward Yeshua. And so you have here now even the beginning of what the Lord is doing. All of this is leading somewhere, leading toward Yeshua. The New Covenant Scriptures in Hebrews talks about how the tabernacle was a parable. It was a parable, right? So the tabernacle is a microcosm, a parable of what God was doing, a parable of the created order. It's like a parcel of the splendor of Eden, right? The tabernacle now is in this place. It's like Eden here because God's presence dwells here. The restoration of relationship with God, right? This is the initial picture of that, image of that. Again, pointing ultimately toward so much more. But this is the beginning of that. So the Shabbat, it's not just a reminder of the original creation in Genesis 1 and 2, but it's a reminder of God's plan to make all things new, of his recreation. And so now we have him in our midst. The purpose of this Shabbat is so that you may know that I am Adonai who makes you holy, right? That I've set you apart. You're in a different category, and the Shabbat is in a different category. Shabbat is holy. It's a day that is a different category to you. And again, and it's a perpetual reminder not of who God is and what his intentions are for his people, to be a light to the nations, to be a picture of restoration right there in the midst of us, right? So the regular keeping of Shabbat, it serves a purpose for our benefit, but it gives us a deeper understanding of who God is. And here, invalidating or profaning the Shabbat is met with is met with death. With the penalty seems harsh, but not when we realize what the Shabbat is intended to do. By not keeping the Shabbat, by intentionally disregarding it, the Israelite would be showing that he or she is not interested in knowing, to know that I am Adonai, right? To the desecration of the invalidation, the profaning of the Shabbat is to work, is to disobey what the Lord has said to do. And the Bible doesn't here provide us with a list of what constitutes work. And that's what, throughout history, often Judaism has looked in desiring to make sure to be obedient to what the Lord has done here, to not profane the Shabbat, has looked to define what is work. And on one level, that's obviously understandable. We want to be obedient to the Lord, but man-made understanding and man-made rules often then became a prison, became something that moved people away from the very heart of Shabbat. But now, by the way, here what you saw in the text though is where it says, "Surely he will die." It's not necessary. It could be someone actively putting him to death, but it's not really in the Hebrew stated in that way. So the death could be the passive consequence. What would happen is, in doing so, they would be being cut off from their people in the midst of the wilderness. Well, cut off from your people in the midst of the wilderness, that's going to result in death. Either way, God is serious here about the Shabbat, about Shabbat rest. And so here's the thing. He's given all of these instructions, and he says, I'm going to fill Aholiav and Bezalel with my spirit to oversee the work of this. I'm going to all of these different things, so you may be overwhelmed with the tasks at hand. And a holy task at that, making a tabernacle for the Lord so that we can be in his midst. This is holy work. And yet, the Lord concludes that saying, pointing to where all the work is leading, right? Shabbat, but also, and you have this imagery that there is work, but there is rest. Now, in this week's Torah portion, the order is reversed. So there we had instructions about the building of the tabernacle, Shabbat command. This week opens with, now we've had the golden calf situation. Moses has interceded on behalf of the people, and he's gone up and he comes back down, and now he begins to give the instructions. And the instructions open up, just the fact that there are instructions is hope. God has said, you're going, he said, now get going to the land that I'll show you. Get going to the land. He's told him at the end of the previous portion. Initially he was like, I'm not going to go with you, and Moses interceded. Anyway, but he's going to be in our midst. So but the opening now, before the implementation of making the Mishkan, the opening here is about the Shabbat. So it's reverse order. Exodus 35, beginning in verse 1, says, Then Moses assembled all of the congregation, the Kohelet, the Kohel, Kehillah, the congregation of the children of Israel, and he said to them, These are the words which Adonai has commanded you to do. Work is to be done for 6 days, but the seventh day is a holy day for you. A Shabbat Shabbaton to Adonai, a Shabbat of complete rest, a Shabbat of Shabbats to Adonai. Whoever does any work then will die. Do not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on Yom Shabbat. continues then he moves into the implementation of the commands about the instructions, building the Mishkan. Verse 4, Moses also said to all the congregation of the children of Israel, "This is the word which Adonai commanded, saying, take from among you an offering for Adonai, whoever has a willing heart." Remember, we talked about that several weeks ago, about this coming with a willing heart, with terumah, coming with an before the Lord. So now Moses is now taking up that offering. But first, he talks about Shabbat, where it was the end of the previous. Now it's the entry point here. So I'm not going to go through all of this here. We'll just read a few of the verse. "Take from among you an offering for Adonai. Whoever has a willing heart, let him bring Adonai's offering, gold and silver and bronze, purple or blue, purple and scarlet cloth, fine linen and goat hair, ram skins dyed red, seal skins, acacia wood, all for the oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the sweet incense, onyx stones and setting stones for the ephod and the breastplate." Right, so everything. He's covering the whole range of things from for the tabernacle, for the spices, for the oils, for the garments. Verse 10, "Let every wise-hearted man among you, let all the wise of heart in your midst come and make everything that Adonai has commanded, including the tabernacle, its tent, its coverings, its clasps, its boards, its crossbars, its pillars, its bases." And it goes on and on. He lists everything, very detailed. So again, not to repeat myself, but in both passages, you have the instructions and the implementation about the construction of the Mishkan associated with the command of keeping Shabbat. So according to Jewish tradition, the association between these Shabbat and the tabernacle was intended to establish the rule that Shabbat overrides the making of the tabernacle. Obviously, this work is going to take more than 6 days to do. And someone could say, well, we got to keep doing it. We got to get this done. What do people say? You can rest when you're dead. That's sort of the American way. You can sleep when you're dead. That's not the way God intended. Right? He calls us to rest every night. He made us to rest every night. Right? He made us to recharge every night. And then he set in place a weekly recharge, and the worship that he's calling us to do and to be in his presence is not to become slavery to us. So you see here, not only is the seventh day, is the Shabbat day, a day when secular work ceases, but it's also a day of rest even from the holiest of work, of labors, right? Making a house for God doesn't override resting in his presence. Right? You sort of have the picture of Mary and Martha, where Martha's serving, and Mary is sitting at his feet, and Martha complains about it, and Yeshua says Mary's in the right place, right? Now, what I discovered, I didn't realize this, and it makes sense that, I mentioned that how in Jewish tradition they've said, hey, we need to figure out what work is. And so, it's a lot. And there are 39 categories of work, of defining what this work is, what melacha is, which is prohibited on the Sabbath. Apparently, those 39 categories are derived from the 39 activities involved in making the sanctuary. So that's at least was the structure. It wasn't simply random. So that's where they got those categories. But the Lord just said cease on that day, right? He didn't say that it would be. He didn't say that it would be that we would just completely cease from, he didn't prohibit healing on the Sabbath. He prohibited work on the Sabbath. And there is, he doesn't define it with a bunch of, like, a lot of different categories in the way that tradition has defined it. So the question might be, why the different order? Why does it go instructions, Shabbat, and then Shabbat and fulfillment? Why the different order? Is the Shabbat the first day or the last day? Well, in one sense, it depends on your perspective. So think about it. God's given the instructions. From God's point of view, the Shabbat was the seventh day. From the point of view of the first humans created on the sixth day, right? They entered right into Shabbat. Shabbat was the first day for them. Shabbat was the beginning for them. The Lord had already prepared everything else. He had done all the work, and then the crown of his creation, he made us and brought us right into relationship with him. So at the simplest level, we understand why Shabbat comes last when God is speaking, giving the instructions about the tabernacle, and then why it comes first when Moses is speaking as a human being. It's from your perspective, right? For God, the Sabbath was the last day of creation. For humanity, it's the first. There's something more fundamental at stake. When it comes to God creating, there's not a gap between what he intends and what he does. Right? He speaks and it becomes. He says it and it is. In Isaiah 46, we read, "Remember this and be assured, recall it to mind, you transgressors, remember the former things of old. For I am God, there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning." Right? Declaring the conclusion right from the start, from ancient time, what is yet to come. Saying, my purpose will stand, and I will accomplish all that I please. When the Lord sets out, when he begins to create, there's no question that things will turn out exactly as he intends, culminating in a Shabbat rest. Right? With God, he can see the outcome. With us, we can't see the end at the beginning. Right? We can't see the outcome at the outset. When you sit down to write or do anything creative, you don't necessarily know how your story is going to turn out. If someone who sits down to write music doesn't know what it's going to sound like at the end, right? An artist who begins painting doesn't have the full picture in mind. When you begin walking in creativity, just in human history, you don't know what it's all going to... There's the law of unintended consequences. That too often, things rarely turn out for people as we plan. So, what do we do? Do we go, well, you just do what you can, and que sera, sera. Whatever will be. Future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. Well, we can do that, and in one sense we do, but if we do that apart from the Lord, it's not a hopeful business. The other option is to put our trust in the Lord, to let the end, the Shabbat, reveal the beginning, right? So Shabbat's not simply a day of rest. Shabbat is the anticipation of the end of history, of when all things are being made new, of the Messianic age, of the fullness of when all things are done. With Shabbat, what we lost in Eden, we see the fullness of in the book of Revelation. On Shabbat, we don't strive. We are at rest. We are content. On Shabbat, we are not permitted to manipulate the world, to make and do. Instead, on Shabbat, we celebrate what has been done, the work that God has done. On Shabbat, we are not allowed to exercise power or dominance over other people or even over animals, in the command that there is rest, so that rich and poor inhabit the Shabbat alike with dignity and with freedom. The only utopia is the world that is yet to come, other than the only good old days were however long in Eden before the fall of humanity. Those are the only great days, the only good days behind us. And the only utopia, is the fullness of the kingdom that is yet to come. So the reason we celebrate Shabbat is that we rehearse every week, every one day in 7, what will be, this fullness of what the Lord will bring, right? It's a symbolic picture today of what will be. It's like that's what the tabernacle is, a parcel of Eden in the wilderness. And Shabbat is a parcel of Eden, of the hope of what is yet to come, a miniature of what is yet to come. And just as the tabernacle had to be exact in its construction and its dimension, because it was a symbolic prototype of the building of what God wanted to do and to have in our midst, that he would be in our midst. And so when we then begin to build that, right, we understand that until he is fully in our midst, we know the day is coming when there will be no temple, because the Lord is in our midst and he is the temple. So all of these things become a picture pointing toward Yeshua, who came to as Messiah to make a way for us to be whole, to be made new, that he has made us new, he's making us new, and that there is his rest that is still yet to come. I know I've gone a little over here. Let's just look when we're going through Hebrews on these alternating days. What we'll eventually get to is in Hebrews 3 and 4. This sermon, Hebrews 3 and 4, is a sermon on Psalm 95. I just want to read from Hebrews 4, though, that says that makes the equates us as believers who have been saved, right? We've been brought out of Egypt, but we're not yet. We've got the life jacket on us, but we're not yet in the boat. But we're as good as saved, so we say we're saved, but we're still in the water. You know what I mean? Like the boat, the what do you call the thing? The lifesaver. It looks like a lifesaver that you eat. Anyway, it gets thrown out to you. Well, you're still in this dangerous territory in the ocean. You're like, I'm saved. Yes, but you got to stay in that thing and get it until you get into the boat. And so Hebrews 4 says they came out, they were saved out of the desert, out of Egypt, but then they stopped trusting and they died short of the desert, or of that Shabbat rest. They died short of the promised land. And so he says, let us fear then, though a promise of entering his rest is left open, some of you would seem to have fallen short. Verse 2, for we also have had good news proclaimed to us, just like they did. But the word they heard didn't help them because they were not unified with those who listened in faith. For we who have trusted are entering into that rest. It's just as God said. So in my wrath I swore they shall never enter my rest. He's quoting from Psalm 95. Even though his works were finished since the foundation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this passage, they shall never enter into my rest. So then, verse 6, it remains for some to enter into it, yet those who formerly had good news proclaimed to them did not enter because of disobedience. Again, God appoints a certain day, today, saying through David after so long a time, just as it has been said before, today if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Verse 8 says, for if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on, right? So the point there is, if the entry into the promised land with Joshua brought us into the land, if that was the fulfillment of God's Shabbat rest, then why later in Psalm 95 is the Lord talking through David about entering into my rest? Is that not already been fulfilled? No, that's a picture of what is yet to come. Right? It wasn't fulfilled fully in the entering into the promised land. That was, again, all a picture of what the Lord intends to do. So he says in verse 9, so there remains a Shabbat rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered God's rest also has ceased from his own work, just as God did. And so what we see here, again, we have build the tabernacle, Shabbat, Shabbat, build the tabernacle. And so we begin the work of the building of the tabernacle with the hope of what is yet to come in front of us. Shabbat. Shabbat. Now build the tabernacle. Now do the work. He's preparing a place. Shabbat is coming. You hold on. It's not que sera, sera, what will be, what will be. What will be is Shabbat. So we get reminded of it right at the beginning. This is coming. This is happening. Hope, rest. Assuredly, it is coming. Because he has said it. And what he says, he does. And what he starts, he finishes. So that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it in Messiah Yeshua. It is this blueprint and holding on to the hope of all that he has for us in the Shabbat and in his presence, in the tabernacle of his presence. Amen? All right. Well, good morning. Quickly, let me say a quick good morning to Jerry and Janet and Ron and Amy and Kathleen and Steve. And good morning to the Eddies, to Lauren and Mike and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett and Felix and to Kelly and Melody Woods. And good morning to, to Elizabeth and Jesse and to Pastor and Sister Martinez. Good morning, you guys. Hope you're doing well. And to Joyce and Joe and Eileen and Sonia and the McCaffreys. And all right. Well, I think for right now, that's everyone. To Misty and hey, my sister, I love you, sis. Hope you're doing well. Don't forget to, again, hit like, subscribe, share. If you haven't shared today's Daily Bite, please just take a moment to watch that. Hope that blesses you, and then just share that. And we will continue have Hebrews continuing tomorrow, and then we'll continue in our Torah portion on Thursday. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.